They were behind schedule. That was the only thing on Isabel's mind as she reset the centrifuge, the hum of the machine blending into the tired murmurs of her classmates in the lab. Their final project had been delayed too many times, pushed back for heavier major subjects, squeezed into whatever time they could salvage between exams, abandoned when more urgent deadlines came up. But now, there was no more time to push. 2 days left. This was the only night they could finish it, and the old faculty lab was the only place still open at this hour. Even the graduating seniors had gone home hours ago. She wasn't the type to complain. She was one of the more active members of the university's newly established MMA club, used to long hours of training, bruises hidden beneath sweaters, the sharp exhaustion of pushing through one more round. Fatigue was nothing. Complaining was nothing. She knew how to push through. Which was why, when she realised she needed to use the restroom, she didn't say anything. The others were focused, and she wasn't about to break their momentum just because she needed a few minutes. She'd be quick. The only working restroom was in the closed-off section of the building, past the dimly lit hallways scheduled for renovation. She walked briskly, her footsteps the only sound in the stale, empty air. She wasn't bothered by the flickering lights. She wasn't bothered by the peeling walls and the heavy doors slightly ajar as if someone had passed through before her. She wasn't even bothered by the silence. What bothered her was the thought of who else might be here. The old faculty wing had been used for fraternity initiations before. The university had cracked down on them, but that didn't mean anything. If they wanted to keep something hidden, this was the perfect place, and she knew what some of them were capable of. One of her friends had ended up in the hospital after an initiation that went too far. A broken nose, 2 cracked ribs, a concussion. No names were released. No one came forward. The school buried the incident. No punishment. No justice. That was why she hated this place. Not because it was empty, because it wasn't empty enough. She reached the restroom, did her business, washed her hands, and glanced at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Just her own tired eyes staring back. Nothing strange. It wasn't until she was walking back that she heard it. At first, it was faint, a sound barely woven into the stillness, something she might have dismissed if she hadn't been paying attention. Then it came again. A low, uneven noise, like wind slipping through a jagged crack in the walls. She slowed. Then, laughter. Men's voices, muffled but unmistakable. Her jaw clenched. Frat boys. She should have just walked away. She knew that. But she also knew what happened when no one called them out. If they were up to something, if this was another initiation, she could record it, report them. She wasn't stupid. She knew she couldn't fight them all. If it was 4 or 5 guys, even she wouldn't stand a chance, but she could catch them in the act. Her hand hovered over her phone, but she didn't turn on the camera yet. The light would give her away. She needed to hide first. There was a storage office just ahead. Dark, abandoned. The perfect place to conceal herself. She slipped inside, pressing her back against the wall. Listening, trying to make sense of the noise. Their voices weren't just getting closer, they were changing. The deep, uneven laughter had begun to stretch, twisting at the edges, warping into something thinner, breathier, feminine, but not in a way that felt human. It was wrong, dragging, distorted, like something struggling to imitate a voice it didn't fully understand. Then, a whisper, software too soft. It came from outside the door, but she felt it, like it was spoken directly into her ear. Her body went rigid. The door was shut. The hallway was empty. And yet, the whisper curled around her skin, threading into her mind like a breath just barely grazing the back of her neck. Another whisper followed, stretching, closer this time. Not through the door, not through the walls, but straight into her skull. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. The whisper had come from the hallway. She knew it had. And yet, she felt it inside of her. Like whoever or whatever was out there wasn't just speaking. It was reaching for her. Her breath shook, but she stayed silent. There was a peephole in the door. Slowly, cautiously, she pressed her eye to the glass. Red. All-consuming. Burning. Wrong. Not light. Not reflection. not anything that should exist. It filled her vision. A fire without heat, a colour that shouldn't move but did. And with it came the cold. A deep, aching chill that sank into her bones, like the warmth was being drained from her skin. She blinked. She needed to be sure. She forced herself to look again. The red hadn't faded. It was still there, still swallowing everything. Her breath was shallow now, her chest tight. The cold had deepened, threading through her ribs, settling in her lungs like something she would never be able to exhale. She squeezed her eyes shut. Not real. Not real. And then, silence. She exhaled sharply and looked a third time. Nothing. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and silent. The red was gone. Fighting to steady her breathing, Isabel pushed the door open, half expecting something, anything to lunge at her. But the hallway was empty and silent. The chill remained, clinging to her bones, a deep, aching cold she couldn't shake even as she forced herself to move. Her pulse was still too fast, the uneven rhythm thrumming in her ears, but she ignored it. She needed to act normal. Nothing happened. That's what she told herself as she walked back to the lab. It was just fatigue, just stress from finals week, just her mind playing tricks on her after a long day. But even as she pushed open the door and stepped back inside, she knew the thought wasn't sitting right. She barely spoke for the next hour. She didn't mean to seem off, but her focus was gone, her mind preoccupied with the same looping questions. What the hell was that red thing in the peephole? Was it light from somewhere? A reflection she hadn't noticed? Or was it something wrong with her? A migraine, maybe. A visual disturbance from exhaustion. Or worse, a neurological issue. Something she didn't know she had. Her hands moved through the motions of the experiment, but the work felt distant, like she was watching herself from behind glass. She knew she should be checking their results, calculating, contributing. But instead, she found herself staring blankly at the numbers, her mind flicking back to that awful silence. That moment when the sound had vanished, when even the air had felt hollow, stripped of everything but her own pounding heartbeat. The red had been gone when she looked the third time. That meant it wasn't real. Right? She swallowed, shaking herself out of it. Her classmates were still working, still focused. She needed to keep up. They finished about an hour later. Uneventful. It wasn't until they were leaving the building, stepping into the humid night air, that anyone said anything. Mara was the first to break the silence. "Hey, Isabel, you okay?" Isabel blinked, her thoughts snapping back to the present. "What?" "You just seemed, I don't know, out of it back there." Mara gave her a curious look. "Like, you kinda coasted through the second half, which is weird because you're usually the one double-checking everything." She hadn't realised it had been that obvious. Isabel let out a small breath, forcing a tired chuckle. "Yeah, long day, I guess. Finals are getting to me." Mara hummed in agreement. "Yeah, same. At least we got everything done. You think it's good enough?" "Good enough?" Isabel echoed, rubbing the back of her neck. "Hopefully." Another classmate, walking a few steps ahead, glanced back at them. "Oh, that's what it was?" They let out a small laugh. "I thought maybe you saw something when you went out earlier." Isabel's stomach dropped. Her breath caught in her throat before she could stop it, her fingers unconsciously clenching into fists. Mara raised an eyebrow. "Saw something?" The classmate shrugged. "Yeah, you were gone for a while. And when you got back, you were kinda weird. I figured maybe you saw something freaky in the halls or whatever." Isabel forced a smirk, rolling her shoulders. "Come on, I don't scare that easily." Mara laughed. "Yeah, true. If anyone's walking around at night, it's probably just some poor grad student trying not to fail their thesis." Another classmate, stretching their arms after the long night, let out a tired sigh. "Still, I wouldn't want to be alone in that wing. That place has too many stories, Isabel frowned slightly but kept quiet, listening. "What kind of stories?" someone asked. "You know, just weird stuff. People see things. There's one about her just wandering the halls. Like, you're walking and she's just there. No sound, no warning, just standing in the middle of the corridor. Or at the windows," another added. "Like when you're walking outside the building. And for a second, you see her looking down at you from the second floor. But when you look again, she's gone." Another classmate scoffed. "No, the worst one's the professor's chair story. Someone swore they saw her just sitting at one of the desks, like she belonged there, just waiting. But when they blinked, she was facing them." A shudder passed through the group, though some of them laughed it off. Isabel's skin prickled, an uncomfortable chill crawling up her spine. None of the stories matched. The places, the details, they all changed. But something about them felt familiar. Someone exhaled sharply. "I mean, the stories are inconsistent, but the one thing that's always the same." Her eyes, Mara finished, her voice quieter now. "Red, like they're burning." A strange stillness settled over the group. Then, one by one, the others nodded. "Yeah, always the same. It's the only detail that never changes. Doesn't matter where she is or how she looks. It's always her red eyes." Isabel's breath hitched. A slow, creeping sensation crawled up her spine, her mind catching up too late. The red. Not light, not reflection. It had filled the peephole completely. Burning. Wrong. She hadn't been looking at something distant down the hallway, lurking far away. She had been staring directly into its eyes, with nothing but a sliver of glass between them. Her body felt light, hollow, like the air had been sucked out of her lungs. The realization hit her in slow waves, rising like nausea, curling in her chest. The whispers, the cold that shouldn't have been there, the crushing silence. She stopped walking. She didn't even realize it at first, but her legs had just stopped moving. The others kept walking ahead, still caught in conversation, until Mara glanced back and noticed. "Hey, what's wrong?" Isabel blinked, her mind still scrambling to come up with something, anything. She couldn't tell them. Not here. Not when they were still too close to the building. It didn't feel safe. She forced herself to shake her head quickly, running a hand through her hair in an exaggerated gesture of exhaustion. Nothing. I think I forgot my book back in the lab." Mara frowned. "You want to go back for it?" Isabel let out a forced chuckle, shaking her head again. "Nah. Too tired to climb back up all those stairs." She stretched, rolling her shoulders. "I'll grab it tomorrow." That was enough to satisfy them. The conversation drifted on, the group falling back into easy chatter. But Isabel barely heard any of it, because even as they walked further away, even as the warm night air pressed against her skin, the cold still hadn't left her bones. A year passed before the renovations were complete. Isabel had transferred to another university by then, but she couldn't resist returning to see the new building for herself. Modern, bright, full of life. It bore no resemblance to the darkened halls she remembered, and yet, the moment she stepped onto the grounds, a shiver crawled up her spine. The sunlight seemed to dim, shadows pooling in doorways that should have been empty. She tried to laugh it off. But even now, years later, she finds herself avoiding peepholes and dark hallways, her heart racing at the slightest creak. Because sometimes, at the edges of her vision, she swears she catches a glimpse of red